On today's show, we're going to be talking about building delight into your design systems. Does delight have a place in design systems, or should it all be grey and boring? I'm Luke Murphy, and I'm joined by my co host, Michelle Chin. We're both design advocates at zeroheight, the design system management platform, and this is Design Systems WTF. Are you on the grey and boring side, Michelle?
Yes, I like monochromatic and, structure. No, I'm a big fan of impulsivity and chaos.
That's why you're part of this podcast, right? That's
Yeah.
that's
That's
why
why I
you
was
work with
hired.
me day to day.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think this is so. This actually came off a talk that I did a few years ago at Design Matters, and because I think it is one of the big criticisms um, that you hear about design systems is that they kill creativity, which is dog shit, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean,
Like, sure. I mean, if you look at, I mean, let's just use an example, right? The most delightful thing in the world, Hollywood. Nothing wrong with Hollywood, right? Um, and but it's like you look at every single story, every single film that you see is modeled on a very similar structure. There are structured story, like structure is not a bad thing. Structure and like templatizing things and making things so that they're repeatable. That's not necessarily undelightful.
no,
Um,
it doesn't, yeah, I think it kind of takes the mundaneness out of some of the design stuff you have to do, right?
yeah.
So then you can focus on being more creative and being more innovative and being more delightful, right? So,
Well, I mean, and that's also because that's the other thing that I think a lot of people say, right? Is that they're like, oh yeah, well no, design systems are intentionally boring so that it gives you more time to do the delightful work. But I actually think that you can build a fair bit of delight into the system itself, right?
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and I think a large part of this comes down to how you're approaching delight and what you're like talking about with delight. Um, because as much as they don't sound delightful, I do think that we should be starting with like our principles and our guidelines when it comes to making sure that your system works on delightfulness. But before we get into that, I suppose, when do you think delight is appropriate, and when more importantly, do you think it's not appropriate?
Yeah, I think it's like you have to think about your use case and the potential how people are using things. So, um I think, like, if part of your brand is being fun, then you need to have delight, right? You don't wanna have a standard, very, vanilla design system. But I remember I saw a tweet somewhere where, like, someone, like, was talking to their therapist about how they lost 2 people in the past year, and so she, like, pointed 2, and then like, it showed balloons in her background on Zoom or whatever. So, like, that was kind of shitty, right? Like,
Oh no,
um, yeah,
yeah, that's
but
bad.
yeah, so I think there's like there's a you need to recognize, like, your use cases, right? And potential risk. I mean, Facebook had that same thing. It's like weird anniversaries and stuff when people died. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I do think that I think that like with delight, you do need to understand context. But I do also think that sometimes there will always be. Sorry, we seem to have a sort of drag race going down my street at the moment. But anyway,
Nice.
uh, um, where was I? Oh yes. I think that it's like there'll always be edge. Edge case is a terrible word, but like there will always be contexts where something can be taken out of context, and I think that you should try and mitigate for those as much as possible. But I think also accepting a little bit. It's the whole flexibility question as well, right? Like accepting that you won't count for every context, but why should that mean that you should um make everything down to like the lowest common denominator almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I do think I think like one of the things that I think is really great to think about when it comes to like delight and the reasons for delight is around which you just informed me that I've been saying it wrong all these years, but the Kano model, not Kano.
Yes.
The Kano model, for those who don't know, very very smart Japanese dude called Noriaki Kano. Developed the Kano model way back in the 80s. That basically he was trying to show about how the how delightful things impacted customer experience and customer loyalty, and basically showed that customer loyalty is connected to our emotional responses to the product. Um, and I thought that the really interesting thing is because there's like three levels that he talks about when he talks about sort of the needs. There's like the must be qualities of a product, which are the basic needs, is what's expected by everyone. You've got the one dimensional qualities, which are like the performance needs, which it's like um, there's satisfaction from the user when they're fulfilled, and there's dissatisfaction when they're not fulfilled. Um, and then you've got the delighters as a level, which are the attractive qualities, means that there's satisfaction when they're fulfilled, but when they're not fulfilled, so like if you put something in and the user doesn't get satisfaction, there's no change in. So basically, you're losing nothing. Um, and so like I'm not suggesting that you should be aiming for delighters. Like you need to do your base level needs of the product to begin with. Don't start with making fun animations and whimsical microcopy. Uh,
When
um,
your stuff doesn't work, yeah.
yeah, when your shit doesn't work, like if it's gonna break on the user and it's gonna leave them dissatisfied because their need isn't being, they're like one dimensional qualities and their must be qualities aren't being fulfilled. Then yeah, like don't work on the attractive ones. But hopefully, you've kind of that's the whole point of design system is to like get those two levels met, right? And then it's like you can start actually um increasing like your user loyalty hugely by like adding these delighters. Um, but yeah, sorry, I'm now I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I
um,
I I think, like, I totally agree with the Kano model, and I think a lot of design systems are just trying to get the bare bones, right? Like,
yeah,
done and implemented. So not many have been able to do the more delightful aspects, but I'm starting to see more delight happening in components. So I'm pretty excited about that.
and I think that it's pretty important here to like define delight, right? Like because it's not necessarily that I'm talking about I don't know, like I can think of like my peak delightful moments of things like in user interface, not just in life. It's not like I, live my life only getting delight out of user interfaces. But in saying that, there have been ones over the years that have really stood out to me. So even like things like on product design, so this isn't user interface, but like we have a brand of smoothies called Innocent Smoothies, and they have lots of very twee, very whimsical like copy on their packaging, including the fact that you can call their office and it's a banana phone, and apparently it just sits in the middle of their office and somebody has to answer it if it gets called, and answer whatever question you have. Um, but things like Mailchimp, I think Mailchimp have done this really well over the years. The fact that when you're about to send the email, there's like the shaky finger hovering over the button, and then you press the button, and then you've got the monkey high five, which is like one of my favorite bits. Or the fact that who was it? Was it GitHub? It was somebody like that. They oh no, it wasn't. It wasn't GitHub. It was God, I'm just talking out my ass now. GitLab. GitLab in their design system documented a socks element, which is
Oh.
like it's just socks, and the description of the component is socks represent a unique way to warm your feet, and it's just got a picture of socks, and like it serves no purpose apart from to make your internal team happy, which is quite like, or the code 418, like you got 404 and 500 and all the rest of it. There's an enshrined in the HTTP protocols. There is 418. I'm a teapot. Um, which is a response code indicates that the server refuses to brew coffee because it is permanently a teapot. Why?
Nice.
Just because it's delightful. But that's like one end of delight. But then I think that there are like there's the other end of delight, right? There is like actually using human centered copy and talking to somebody through your copy like they're a person. It's using tiny little bits of like motion that make people like even just if anybody's refreshed their Gmail recently and it's just got the nice little like colored circles that flip over on each other. And it's just mm, it just
Yeah, like, the
it
YouTube
massages my
button.
brain. Yes.
Yeah, like, when you subscribe to a channel, like, it does these little sparkly things, and so I subscribed and unsubscribed to, like, one person's channel, like, 5 times just to watch it. And I was like, "This is probably not what they intended for this."
Mm,
But it's cool, right? Like, I think it adds a little, like, glitter to your life, like, a little happy moment in your day. I really like that, and I see, like, a lot more people doing that now, and I know more fun brands, like Creative Mornings has a lot of, like, creative, like, their voice and tone's really creative, their website's creative, Duolingo does a lot as well,
oh, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
especially in their marketing, it's great. I mean, they got to the point where duos become a bit creepy now, but that's fine.
Yes, okay, it's not just me. Well, because like, I have the app and, like, I have the little widget, and if I don't practice my Japanese, like, the illustration changes, and they're kind of weird, and I'm like, "What is this?" Like,
Did you not see they had an April Fool's a couple of years ago where it was like, we've turned on location services on Duolingo. So now we're offering the service where Duo will come to your house and make you study Spanish.
"Oh, no."
And it was the whole like ad was like it was like, oh, you haven't studied your Spanish. And then it was like, Duo is at your back door, and you just see this like giant bird silhouette and like a knock on the door. Creepy. They know what they're doing. Um, yeah. I think like I think stuff like that is great. But I suppose the question is like, how do you? And actually, I'm we're gonna run out of time totally. But I'm curious, because you mentioned before if your product suits it. Now, I mean, I'm already starting to think of examples that will prove me wrong, but I was gonna say I think every product deserves delight. How
Yeah,
much
I think
delight
it's yeah, like, and
and
the
what
kind of
flavor?
delight.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, it reminds me of, like, when a long time ago when you had to, like, walk into a bank to deposit money or something. I walked into a bank and the people behind the counter, they were all laughing and, like, being really silly, which I was like, "I'm a fun person too, like, that's cool, but actually, can you not be laughing when you're dealing with money? Like, I don't need you to make an accounting mistake unless it's in my favor, obviously." But that stuck with me. I'm just like, "Y'all can't be silly here." Like, money
Uh,
money
it's
is at stake.
it's the classic, like, if you've ever watched surgeons do their job, because it is just day to day to them, um, and there is a high link between psychopathy and being a surgeon. But it's
Topic
true.
for
Look it
another
up.
episode.
Yeah, great book called Wisdom of Psychopaths. Anyway, um, yeah, but it's like they'll be listening to like upbeat music and whistling along and cracking jokes to each other whilst like operating on someone's brain, and it's like that it's one of those things, but it is one of those things that I think you do need to be careful with, because it is the whole like if you're frustrating somebody and you give them a delightful little error message, it can possibly go down bad, which is why I think that like I think it's like important. I don't know, I had the whole like design team charter and then design principles is like a good way to like start off that, like where to enshrine. um like we had at Memrise, the place that I worked at before Zero Height, one of our design principles was keep it wonky, because we were a
Nice.
wonky brand. And the whole concept was that every like the product and the brand should feel tactile and squishy, and you should want to feel like you're like pressing things when you're like playing with it. Um and it was like a really good thing to keep in mind, to just like whenever we were designing any kind of any new user interface or any new components for the design system, it was all about like, cool, how can we make this and it was an interesting challenge as well. Like, how do we make this wonky, but also make it repeatable and like reusable? Um, and yeah, I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that idea of, like, mixing it in as you're doing the design versus like, "Oh, we'll get to that later," right? So, I've seen other models where you're like, "Let's just get the base," and then, on like, the final stage will be, like, adding animations or motion or delight, right?
Oh,
So
yes. So this is the whole like MVP thing, right? There was a point in, and don't punch me for this, but there was a point in my career where I was like trying to push for the concept of MDPs, minimum delightful product, um, because it was the whole like concept of like what is viable, and this is why I think like enshrining it at the team and the design principles level is important because that is what dictates what is viable and what viability means. Because I think that like viable should mean a core level of quality and like polish and therefore potentially like delight um that's in there. um because I think it's like if you don't count that as part of your viability, then and making that explicit, that it like devalues it as a concept within your team, and you're never gonna do it, right? Because
yeah.
whoever actually goes back and iterates on the things that they do, well, maybe I've just been in startups for too long.
Well, it's even at enterprise companies, right? Like, you're always moving to the other thing, the other feature you have to build. Oh, we need these other new components. It's not like, oh, let's go back and touch up some of these components and make them more interesting.
I
Yeah.
do think one of the easy ways to like take away as well, like from a design system point of view, one of the coolest ways to like add a bit of delight is, and not nobody's doing it, not enough people are doing it. Illustration systems.
Yeah.
God, I love illustration systems. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, go and check out Blush, blush.design. Um, Pablo has done some amazing work. There's some great talks on illustration systems as well. But you can basically get these systems together where you can build up your product illustrations and marketing illustrations and whatnot from like building blocks, and end up having like a system that is actually completely like composable and reusable. Um, and I think it's like, I don't know, I think it's really powerful. Like we've played with it a bit at Zero Height internally, with our little like zippy logo and um, little avatars and stuff for us. But like it's something that like I'd love to play with some more.
Yeah, I wanted to get an illustration system, but it was out of budget and my my eyes were bigger than my stomach, I guess. Um the reality of my work, I guess, is yeah. So, I know some people who have tried to get illustration systems made, working with really great illustrators. It's hard because it's a different way of thinking. An illustrator creating illustrations doesn't always necessarily think of like the bits and pieces and how they all work together to be um, added, removed, adjusted. So people
There
like
is
are sitting, standing. Yeah,
like
it's
there's a reason that there's a handful of about 4 or 5 people who seem to have built all of the illustration systems out there. And there's a reason why Blush exists, because it's like run by a team of people who understand it and get it and therefore are trying to replicate it as much as possible. Um, but yeah, it's hard. I again, like it's something that I've dabbled in, and I did it for like some talks to go, oh yeah, this is easy to do. And after like pulling my hair out for a week, realized no, it's not. Um,
We got close. We had like an illustrator draw a bunch of pieces that we could put together and build a scene. So that was closer, and not nearly as much work and effort, like in terms of, it's more straight up drawing pieces of things versus like the parts like arms and hands and hair and stuff. So yeah.
yeah. I realize we've only got 4 minutes left, so we should probably do some questions. So, I mean, the good thing is there's only one question so far, which maybe means that what we've been saying is really interesting, which is why nobody's asked questions, or it could just be that they're
People
really
are clicking on the subscribe button in YouTube.
exactly, yeah. Um, I think it's supposed to be facetious, but there was a question of aren't even grey and structured design systems still delightful, or is that just for design system nerds? Um, the reason that I was asking this though is because I actually think that it's really important to point out the different types of delight. We did touch on it a little bit earlier, but I actually like I've cataloged out the five what I see is like the five types of delight. So you've got
Ooh.
playful, which is what you think of, which sort of makes sense. It's the stuff that gives you a happy, warm feeling inside. You've got attractive, which I think that actually like or aesthetic delight, and it's like I think that's where like gray and structured design systems can sometimes actually be super delightful when it is like really aesthetically pleasing and it just like mm, mwah. It's like things like I don't know. I'm trying to think of good examples. Anything pentagram do. Um, um, most of the shit you see on Design Inspiration, if anybody still goes on that website. Um, there's natural as well, which I think are like I think this is where like experiences come in as well, like comfortable and intuitive things, as well as things that just feel like they're playing into like known entities, affordances, natural affordances, almost maybe even bordering on like skeuomorphism, that kind of delight. I think Headspace do this really well in like a really like liminal way.
Yeah, they do a really
Um,
good job.
oh yeah, and then personal. I think like there's the oh sorry that's only four. I think it's one of those things where I think like personalization can actually be like delightful in itself in terms of like a design as again like as an experience design factor where it's like when something gets it right. Um, I think one of the key things like when Spotify nailed the Discover Weekly I think it's kind of got off the tracks now, but like nailed the Discover Weekly first. It felt magic because it's like it knew you and it was recommending stuff you hadn't heard before. And that I don't know, that just felt or their first time capsules as well, where it's like, how did it know what I was listening to when I was 15? Um, then you realize how predictable you are. And then empowered is the last one. So I think it's like experiences that make people feel like they're doing something that they couldn't do previously, or doing something that they've been told that they can't do. Basically, making somebody feel like they've got superpowers in the experience, um, and like almost like giving them something that makes something a lot easier, and just like reduces the cognitive load for them. I think is like really great. Again, I've just jumped
I'm
all over
like, design token naming convention generator.
that.
That
Hey, I
would
mean,
that would empower
yeah,
me.
yeah. I mean, my design system name generator, I think, really empowered a lot of people because it's one of the hardest things. And I mean, all of the suggestions from that were excellent, right? Um,
Of course.
name my designsystem.com, I believe. I can't remember. um, do we want to try and do one more question?
Yeah, because this one's a really meaty one if people
Oh,
can stick around.
great. How do you deal with, thanks, Daniel, for this question. How do you deal with an organization that only cares about MVP and you have that pressure of stakeholders to release components quickly to support a product initiative, but not necessarily because it was fully designed to include some delight? Basically, how do you battle with MVP culture?
Yeah, I don't know. I kinda, like I don't work at your company, so I will tell you what you should do, whether you do that or not. I don't it's up to you. But I feel like I'm all about sneaking stuff in.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, there is that.
like, they don't I mean, do your stakeholders know how long it takes to make a button in variants in Figma? Probably not. And you just say like, "Hey, I'm gonna need this amount of time to do this." Like, no one's gonna be like, "No, you don't." That's my take is just assume that they don't know everything and that you can just kinda, like, work it in. But I
Yeah,
think also to some extent, you need to have some forethought about, like, holistically how animations work and motion and delight works just because you can't add one-off, like, delight to a button and then, delight to a drop down, and then it clashes, right, when you're thinking about seeing this stuff together. So, um, yeah, sneak it in.
I think also like start small. It's a big one as well, which is similar. Like you don't need to build an entire illustration system just to build delight. If you want to start, and then what it's about is then convincing the people that it's worth doing. And I think, and it is. I'm not going to lie and say that it's easy. Um, I do think that one of the best ways to like a good way to do it, sorry, is to test it with people and get qualitative feedback. Um, uh, do some user testing where you're videoing the participants and see the reaction that they have. Um, because it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the Kano model stuff, is that it adds to customer loyalty, it adds to retention, it adds to reduction in churn, it adds to how quickly somebody's going to convert to being a paying customer because these things do, like, you can see measurable difference when you do this. But I think that to get to that point where it's showing the numbers is hard. So like start with qualitative feedback. Um, and then the other side is to go away, go and have a look. Google products, death by a thousand paper cuts. You'll probably get some great example of products that have died because they sacrificed on quality because they were going after MVPs all the time and they were never sort of building it to the level of quality that they wanted or adding that little bit of delight and extra on top. Because the thing is you probably won't see a difference if you're the only product out there doing it. As soon as another product builds a delightful experience, you're screwed.
Yeah.
um, and I can candidly say that this is one of the big things that happened at the last place I worked at with Memrise. We were the number one language learning app. We had 15 million, users. Um, it was going super well. And then Duolingo came along and Duolingo did it better. Um, the underlying systems, very similar. In fact, their language learning technology, maybe even a bit worse, especially at that point. um, um, but their UI was beautiful and delightful and it had great interactions and it just made people want to use it. And they very quickly got to about 550 million users, which is a scale of difference. And so it's like that kind of quality and delight can actually, put you out of business if you don't do it.
Yeah, I think showing, like, qualitatively how well it does is will resonate really well. Like, seeing is believing, right? So,
100%. Yes. I think that's all the time we've got for today. If you have any questions you want to fire us or any suggestions for future episodes, then please send them through either via the Zero Slack community, which you can access at zeroheight.com/Slack. You can email us at community@zeroheight.com, or you can get in touch with us on X or Instagram. On X, we're Zeroheight. Instagram, we're Zeroheight HQ. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Until then, see you next time.